Hi, everybody. Welcome to the River Network Story Lounge at River Rally. My name is Julian Gonzalez. I work for Earth Justice. I work on legislative issues in Washington, D.C. related to water policy. I'm also a River Network board member. And I have with me today in the Story Lounge, Katharine Lange, who is the policy director for Massachusetts River Alliance. And she'll tell you a little bit more about what she does and the org in a second. We're here to talk about state policy advocacy. River Network works with advocates all around the country on state advocacy and federal advocacy. And on state advocacy specifically, there's a lot of resources they have, such as the State Policy Hub, where you can learn about interesting, helpful policies that folks are fighting for around the country. You can learn about how folks are defending their communities and their waters from bad policies around the country. There's also a monthly state policy call, a peer call, where you get to chat with folks from around the country about federal issues, about state issues. You can ask questions, you can brainstorm together, and it's a really helpful resource. And if you haven't tuned into one of those calls, it's really welcoming and it's pretty informal. So highly recommend you go to River Network's website and check that out. So now that we've talked a little bit about River Network's resources, I'd like to get into some particulars with Katharine. So I guess before I ask you about state policy successes in Massachusetts, can you say a little bit about your role and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Julian, for that introduction. I'm Katharine. I'm policy director for Mass Rivers. We are a statewide organization with 86 member groups across the state. So we have a number of groups who are working at the local or watershed level. Some of our groups are statewide, but what we offer is looking at state policy at the Mass state level and communicating that to those who are working locally. What's happening, what's important for their watershed, what we need to know, what should they be doing to advocate or act in regards to that policy. I'm from Eastern Connecticut and live in Rhode Island and now in Massachusetts. So big love to my region of the country.
Showing New England much love here.
Wow.
So Massachusetts, a coastal state, tons of rivers. Can you talk a little bit about some state policy successes that you're proud of and how you've worked with folks in Massachusetts on those issues?
Sure. Well, you mentioned River Network State Policy Hub. We did a session on there about a bill that we successfully got passed into a law on a sewage notification program. So I recommend going to look at that if you want to know more about combined sewer overflows and what we are trying to do about them. But what's on my mind right now is in our state, our legislative session is ongoing. And we have a 2-year legislative session, but a 1-year budget cycle. So every year, our advocates, including me, are working on budget advocacy for our state. So if all of the money that our state spends in its agencies, we try and advocate for a larger chunk each year to go towards our environmental work. Even though Massachusetts is a leader in many ways, environmentally and socially, we've lots to be proud of our whole state budget, which is like $60 billion. For many years, not even 1% of that total budget went towards our environmental agencies. Not even 1%. Like, what? That's so wild. And that's inclusive of recycling and water and toxics and air quality and state parks. Like, everything under the sun was less than 1%, which was unacceptable to us. And we've tried for a number of years now, even before I started with Mass Rivers, to get that number up. And over the years, working in coalition with other statewide organizations, we've been pretty successful in increasing that number. And the success really comes from the year after year building the case, going to lawmakers, explaining to them, what do our agencies do? How is their mission expanding? They're taking on, PFAS and climate regulations that are new and they didn't have to deal with before. And why do they need more money to accomplish all those goals? So after years of building the case, we've been pretty successful. Over the past few years, we've gotten $40 million in addition for our state agencies to use. The budget is ongoing right now. So I was just emailing about some budget amendments around culverts. And culverts in particular is kind of a wonky, kind of nerdier thing a lot of people don't think about, right? If you drive around and your roads are safe, you might not think about the culverts and small bridges below them that are holding back our streams. But there might be, fingers crossed, a lot of money for culverts in our state budget this upcoming fiscal year. So that's something I'm proud of is the success financially, but also the familiarity that lawmakers now have with some of these programs that to us are really important, and we hope get more and more limelight within the state budget.
You mentioned education with lawmakers and with people in Massachusetts, year over year, week over week, to just familiarize people with these issues. One thing that's interesting to me about Massachusetts and many other states is, when you're talking about increasing things like the state environmental program budgets, it's not just the environment versus pollution. You're talking
Right.
about environmental programs versus funding that could be for schools or for
Right.
other issues. So that is a very specific kind of interdisciplinary communications. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach that?
Totally. And I think that's something that people experience at the local level too, right? When it's, do we build the new school or do we fund a new sewer? Like you shouldn't have, it's a really hard choice and you want everything. Um, Something that we've been working on is making the case that environment is not separate from those other things, right? Investing in your environment, investing in your ecology is investing in your economic development, is investing in your public health. In our state, like in many states, we have a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing to support the demand that's there and at an affordable rate. And so there's a big push to build a lot of housing. And to do that, you need drinking water and you need sewer connections. So we're trying to make those connections to lawmakers and all elected officials that it's not separate, right? It's not just something cute, hug a tree for the tree's sake, right? Like this is all connected. And by investing in water, in environment, in ecology, you are investing in all the things you also care about.
I'm glad you phrased it that way. One of the things I like the most about Mass Rivers Alliance and River Network as a whole is, it's made up, these groups, these coalitions are made up of primarily environmental groups. But a lot of these environmental groups are made up of community members. And these
Hmm.
community members don't live in silos, they live in communities. So
Yeah.
they're as aware about environmental issues as they are as about education issues or
Yeah.
transportation issues or any number of issues. So I think, when you're talking to folks on the ground instead of, people like me from DC, for example, y'all are really the best messengers to make that case about how these environmental issues are not just quote unquote environmental issues. They
Right.
tie into every other aspect of people's lives.
Totally. And I'll note that in this state budget advocacy, we work with a lot of other statewide organizations to make that case at the state level. And one of them that's been a strong advocate is the Union for the State Engineers and Scientists. So, our main motive coming into this work is healthy rivers for people and wildlife. And everyone agrees with that. But, maybe someone else's main motive is I want stable, good jobs for my people. And we can come to that shared goal even from these different motives.
That's awesome. We'll circle back to that later
Yeah.
because I'm really interested in the idea of cross movement partnerships,
Yeah.
right? Traditionally, the environmental movement is people who care about rivers and streams and birds and
Yeah.
turtles and things like that. But nowadays, it's really a big party and it's a mix of
Big
people who care
party.
about a lot of things.
It's a good party.
It's a great party.
Yeah.
So one other thing I want to talk about is, when you join us on these monthly policy calls, we're not just talking about state policy. We're also talking about federal policy, and a lot of the times, I think personally that federal advocates don't always do the best job of explaining how these battles on the ground on, community issues or state issues connect to these big federal policies
Yeah.
where you're talking about billions of dollars or EPA programs that sound really complicated.
Yeah.
Do you think you could talk a little bit about, at least for you, what value you get from the federal part of these
Mm,
discussions?
a lot. I get a lot of value. um, yeah, it is hard to work at multiple levels. So I feel like if I can invest my time and my expertise at the state level, I really rely on other people like you to tell me what's going on in DC. Um, Yeah, like EPA programs, for example, our cities are nonprofits. Our state is applying for grants from EPA, and it's really helpful to know how much money is there, how is it different from past years, what new requirements are there, and is that program in jeopardy? Maybe is Congress interested in funding that program higher or lower? And
Mhm.
if that's a program that we've seen results with on the ground, should we be activating and trying to get involved and have our members of Congress make sure that program is going to be stable for the next few years? So that's really helpful to know. On the receiving end, things that we care about are decided. They're never guaranteed. We have to keep speaking up to make sure those programs are still there and funding the things that we want to see. Um, Also, the obviously SACA decision was monumental for our space, and I will admit that I hadn't really examined our wetlands laws as much as I should have before that came out. And then that was a real wake up call to be like, oh my God, what do we have on the books? How is it going to change federally? And what areas should Massachusetts look to improve in light of this choice? So that was really helpful last year, just a year
Mhm.
ago.
So
Yeah.
if you are fortunate enough to live in a state that has really strong protections that were greater than EPA's, you may be in a different situation than if you're in a state that has rules that say they can't be stricter than EPA.
Mhm.
And now that EPA is not strict at all, your state will be not strict at all, and your wetlands will be in trouble. And even if you're
Yeah.
in a state where the laws on the books are good, if the state upstream of you has shaky laws, you're getting that polluted water despite your
Yeah.
good laws. So you're going to be in trouble anyway. So this is an everyone problem. And we've had a lot of discussions about really wonky topics like what wetland laws are on the books in Massachusetts, because even if you're in a good state, you may have relied on EPA for one
Mhm.
specific program or some kind of permit. And these are the kind of connections that I think if you take advantage of River Network's resources, you can better familiarize yourself with how state advocacy impacts federal advocacy and vice versa. And the other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to say, which your stories have been a perfect example of, is just how much the storytelling of local advocates and local partners and state partners drives federal work. I
Mhm.
can show folks in DC spreadsheets until I'm blue in the face. I can give them quotes about what Earth Justice thinks, but what they really want to hear are what people in their states and in their communities and in their district thinks and what they're spending their time on. So you can get a lot of that from these River Network
Yeah.
resources, which is really helpful.
That's helpful.
Another thing I wanted to talk about in terms of state advocacy is, well, this is really true of any advocacy, but
Yeah.
this is often a long game. You're not going to really come across issues where you first learn about some pollution and then you stop it in a month. That's not really a thing. I wish it was a
I would
thing.
say no.
If you find out how to do that, please tell me.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about just the nature of the work being long term and
Yeah.
how Mass Rivers deals with that, and then how you as an advocate deal with that?
Yeah. It's a long game, which is, sometimes pretty frustrating to be like, this problem is so obvious. We have sewage discharging into our rivers. Oh my God! Like, why can't we just immediately act on this? And it's sometimes frustrating trying to navigate the legislative cycles, regulatory processes, and even just awareness raising can take a long time. When to you it might seem so obvious that it's a problem, but um, I have found one thing that I'm working on in our state is on drought regulations. How do we respond when there's a drought in our state? And I know that coming from New England, it might seem silly to be complaining about drought when we have Western states who have much bigger droughts, but we certainly experience them. And for us, for our region, it's kind of a new scale of drought that we're experiencing. They're longer. They're also flashier. So our regulations, our culture, our laws are certainly not caught up to where our climate is. I know that's something that everyone's experiencing is the climate's moving a lot faster than we can kind of keep up with on the books. So uh, I year after year have been working on this same bill, trying to get it passed. People have heard my spiel, got the same fact sheet. I just changed the year out. But you've all been there. You get a new picture, but it's the same stuff. Um, and that there's no shame in that. Work smarter, not harder. But also there are so many angles to our work, right? Like water is everything, as we're saying, environmental stuff's connected to everything. So it's been helpful to try and find new examples of where here drought is impacting our agricultural sector, where drought is impacting our recreational sector, and bringing those stories, like you're saying, into the campaign, what also has changed is I think when we first started advocating around this provision, right now it's a bill, but it's also in regs. We're trying on all fronts to get this thing passed. It was kind of talking about water withdrawals and drought, kind of for water's sake, and talking about that as an isolated event. But we have experienced over the past few years a really extreme drought summer followed by really extreme flooding, where we had dams that we thought might break and towns had to be evacuated, like really scary levels of precipitation that we weren't ready for. So now when I'm communicating about the drought bill, I'm like, no, it's really a climate preparedness bill. We've seen these two extremes and our state isn't ready for either. So here's one solution to get us moving towards a safer, more prepared, more adapted climate future. So I think just bringing in new angles to the same story has been helpful for me at still the same bill. I haven't changed it, but letting people know that it's applicable to more things is good.
That's really awesome. It kind of speaks to the creativity involved in this kind of work. People don't really think of policy advocacy as creative, right? You're reading boring laws and talking about important issues.
Long hearings.
Nobody loves hearings. But there really is some creativity in terms of how you frame these issues. And you mentioned, working with unions. And this is the last thing I want to end with.
Sure.
River Network has resources like the State Policy Hub that you can find data on different policies, what's worked and what hasn't. But I think really the secret sauce behind River Network's success is creating partnerships in different directions between federal groups like Earth Justice and state groups like Mass Rivers Alliance, between different state groups, between folks in the traditional environmental space and folks newer in the environmental space. So can you talk a little bit about just the role of, bringing different people into this work and how that has affected your successes in Massachusetts?
Yeah. Well, water's life. Everyone cares about water. Whether they care about this particular regulatory thing that's coming up and seems really dense, might be a jump, but that they care about water. So how can you connect what they already care about to this seemingly wonky thing in advocacy? I think with PFAS becoming a bigger and bigger issue, that's been a huge connection to the public health community, to doctors, to nurses, to like the toxics groups who are working really hard in those spaces, but maybe haven't delved into, for us, like our Water Management Act or our water withdrawals or our wetlands protection. And we know that those things at the end of the day are all connected. And if they're both really strong, we'll all be better off. But the PFAS example is one where I've now gotten to meet a lot of people in health foundations and doctors associations for environmental progress, and people at universities who are doing research in the public health space are all saying, oh, we should step back and understand more about water. And that's been a really great connection for us to make.
That's awesome to hear. We definitely need more of that. Katharine, thank you for sharing your stories about the great work y'all are doing in Massachusetts. On behalf of River Network, as a River Network board member, on behalf of Earth Justice, as somebody who does this stuff in DC, we just really appreciate your work. And if you're watching, thank you for tuning in. And please go check out River Network's resources. You'll find out ways to reach us and other folks like us who are doing great work all over the country.
Yeah, thanks. I'm so big doing it with People's Water Work.
Hi.
Hey. I wanted to ask also because I think what I was trying to interpret in coming here is if you can maybe tell a little bit more about how you're telling the stories of your community work as you're trying to get those appropriations and build the levels of advocacy across different groups. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about that.
Totally. One thing that I was really excited to say and then forgot is on strategy. I think one way that I am excited to tell a story, I don't think I'm the expert at it, but one thing that I'm really striving to do is tell the story in the long game and outside of just the ask. Because so often we only approach a decision maker when you need them to do something. And it is so helpful if you already know them when you don't have an ask. So I'm organizing right now this summer a series of federal and state legislator visits to our wild and scenic rivers. We have 4 in our state. Just to walk around, and I don't have an ask of them. There's nothing on the table in this moment. We're going to talk about issues as they come up, of course, but just to increase that base understanding of what is a wild and scenic river, what is the ecosystem, what has that program brought to your community, how is this river amazing in your district, and they might know the river is there, or the park or the wetland or whatever you're talking about, but do they? This is going to be pretty soft, but do they know what it sounds like? Do they know what it smells like? Have they picked out a favorite flower in the bog? These kind of softer things is what I'm trying to increase amongst our decision makers. When that's a site visit isn't possible, when I've gone to hearings, I've asked people to bring photos, and we do a stand-up board. I've asked in advance the hearing, say, hey, heads up, we're going to bring these displays, can you provide a stand? And they did. And we go up to the front and you're talking, you can reference the photos. This one was about drought. So we gave the hearing when luckily the drought had passed. So droughts is just a visceral thing to go and see a dry creek. To have that photo of the before and after in the room was really helpful to be like, we know it's October now, but let's not forget what August looked like. So visuals. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about these wetland issues are also economic development issues and labor issues, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach establishing your credibility to talk about things that aren't really your area of expertise when you're, in those rooms trying to get the scoop of stuff that's not fully your focus area?
Totally. I think this same theme of trying to get to know people before the point is helpful. In my notes, I wrote, just say hi, which is real, right? If you are just getting to know legislators, we all just want to work with people who are nice and smart and responsible. And if you've shown that you are that in your issue, then they're going to take your word on probably these other things too. So long game, establishing yourself so they know who you are and know that you are nice and smart and will respond to their emails. I think that's helpful. I'm talking about other issues. Well, first of all, I definitely will admit when I don't know something, and that's okay. There are other advocates who are really smart and know the housing code off their head, and it's okay if you don't. But I think luckily with water, it's not too hard to make the connection, right, between these other things. So if they can just, it's I think not too scientific of knowledge to share. People already know this stuff. It's just pointing it out to say, as a reminder, building housing is going to require a lot of pipe. Going to require a lot of sewage, and that takes a lot of money.
The other thing I'll add, because the same thing comes up in DC and federal advocacy, is another reason why it's important to build partnerships across disciplines and across movements is sometimes we may not be the right messenger for stuff, and that's okay. There's some meetings I go to with congressional staff, and I'll bring people like Katharine, or actually Katharine, to the meeting. And it's helpful because they know what I'm going to say about these issues 99% of the time, but they may not know what Katharine is going to say. Sometimes it may be advantageous for me to just not be there at all.
Yeah.
But we might talk beforehand, and, we'll bring whoever is an expert on the economic benefits of wetlands.
Yeah.
Whether it's associations of labor folks or economic institutions or professors. And I'm happy to just sit back and just chill in the hallway while they do their thing. And sometimes it's weird, but that's what gets the job done.
Yeah, agree.
So kind of along the lines of the same question over here. But part of lobbying, it's such an insider game, and a lot of the same players that come and show up time and time again to hearings. But I'm wondering about what kind of work y'all do to kind of increase the ability for, community members to come and participate and, demystify the process.
Yeah.
Because, it's such a, it's so intimidating.
Yeah.
So what do you do to try to, increase that tent building?
I think that's the bulk of my work, more than the actual direct lobbying is the explanation. So we're a statewide group. We have 68 member groups, most of whom are watershed associations. So they are neighborhood level, they are watershed level, they are working with their mayors and like smaller units, and they don't have time to read the budget, and you shouldn't. It's kind of boring and long. So I do, and then tell them like, here's some highlights. Every 2 years, in accordance with our legislative calendar, Masterverse hosts a lobby for the Rivers Day. So I do workshops in advance to explain like, here's the process, here's where we are in the process, here's what we're asking for, here's like exactly how you can ask it. We're going to practice doing that. So it's not scary. I give everyone background on the issues and the person that they're lobbying, to be like, they are elected in this year, here are the issues they care about, they're chair of this committee, like to have that background is helpful. Same thing, if you were going on a date with someone, you would like look them up on the internet and be like, who are they? What are they into? Where are they coming from? You do the same thing when you're having these meetings. Like, where are they coming from? Where they go to college? Are we like, find that connection? It's like, sounds silly, but it's like really that basic, just to have a few facts going in. Yeah, so we had a lobby day, which is really successful. It is so wonderful to have people for the first time maybe coming to the State House and feeling like it might be intimidating to walk in. We got, oh my God, it's all lawyers in suits. And you can also be there. Like, you're so qualified to come, which is the thesis of our presentation. Thursday. It's tomorrow. You should come to our presentation. It's going to be a pep talk. It's going to be so fun. But
the super short version of the presentation is, if you're here at River Rally, if you've checked out River Network's website, you're probably already in the like 99th percentile of people qualified to talk about water and river issues to elected people and their staff. You almost certainly know more than their staff about it, because their staff have to work on 9,000 issues.
Yeah.
And they don't have the time to do that all. So they rely on people like you for expertise. And a big part of my work is working with partners and demystifying exactly what you said. These meetings are important, but at the same time, they're also not a big deal.
They're not a big deal.
You can set up another one on Zoom if one doesn't go bad. And for the most part, these folks have so many meetings that as soon as we're done, they have another meeting to attend to. So like, they're regular people working a regular job in a lot of ways. The stakes seem high, and they are high because we have a lot to fight for, and we have a lot of stuff to protect. We have a lot of rivers and people to protect. But at the same time, on like a just human to human level, it's really not that different than, talking to a teacher at your kid's school or anything like that. So one of the things I like about River Network is they make things accessible. So definitely, reach out to us or other folks if you're watching this. Check out River Network's website, because there's a lot of wonky stuff on there, but there's also a lot of things about how to make advocacy accessible.